Hi there. Welcome to this Gaming Engines for Windows 8 Jumpstart. We are very excited about all the content that we're going to be doing today. First, we'd like to introduce who you're going to be associating with today through video. So I'd like to introduce my friend here, Jeremy Foster.
That's me, Jeremy Foster. You can find me online at codefoster.com. Some of you, hopefully, have seen the series of Jumpstarts that Michael and I did on a different topic. If so, then you're familiar with the two of us. Anyway, you can find me online if you're looking to get up-to-date information on all things Windows 8, games for Windows 8, HTML and JavaScript for Windows 8. That's kind of what I do. So codefoster.com. Find me on Twitter at codefoster. And by the way, why don't you just go ahead and jump on your Twitter client now and throw me a shout out to @codefoster. And we're going to be using the #MVA Jumpstart hashtag in Twitter today. So go ahead and include that in your shout out. We'll just get a little bit of a conversation going on Twitter. Although I know most of you are also on the chat session right now. So we're going to have some good community around this online session. We're going to have a lot of fun.
Cool.
And actually, one more thing I wanted to say. I did write a book, and I just wanted to show that real quick. So this is CSS for Windows 8 app development, and you can find that online at aka.ms/CSSbook if you'd like a copy.
Very cool. Yeah. Thank you, Jeremy. Yeah. Well, just briefly, my name is Michael Palermo, and I am also a peer of Mr. Jeremy, a Microsoft Technical Evangelist. And I love doing the jump starts. I love the experience I have with the HTML5 stuff, but I am so excited about what we're going to be doing today. With regard to little information about myself, published author in technologies such as ASP.NET, XML, C#. Love my current passion right now is CSS, HTML5, JavaScript, everything that's Windows 8. And if you want to find out more about me, you can go to my landing page with some cool links at the aka.ms/Palermo4 link. And that's enough about myself. I'm finished with all that. But you know what? Today, there is a third dimension with regard to our presenters. So I'd like to bring up right now Mr. Adam Tuliper. Come on, Adam, come on out. Woohoo!
Thank you, guys. It's awesome to be here today. We have some great content to cover, and when you guys are ready to talk about the third dimension, I think I'll join on board here because you can do some really cool 3D stuff we're going to talk about. I wish I had a book to plug, but I don't, so I can plug Jeremy's book because this is a great book. I've actually read it. Thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah, I'm sorry we don't have a chair for you.
That's okay. I'm tall. My knees work quite well. They're getting worn out a bit early. But I'm super excited to be here. I'm a software architect for many years and getting a lot of gaming lately and Win.js and HTML, JavaScript. So let's do this.
Where do folks find you online?
AdamTuliper.com.
Cool.
And at AdamTuliper on Twitter.
Great.
Yes.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Guys. See you in a bit.
All right, so you'll see him in following modules throughout the day. Let's go ahead and consider our agenda. So in this first module, we're going to be considering, prior to the break that is, these three modules, and the first one's planning your game. This is really important, so make sure that you stay tuned. We got some really good tips in here. Plus, we're in the next module, we're going to consider game assets. I mean, this is like the core of your game are all the assets. And then, I'm very excited about this. Jeremy is going to help us through the world of Construct 2 by Skira. That's a gaming engine that we're excited to see. And he'll pretty much take the reign on that and show some cool stuff. And what are we going to do after the break, Jeremy?
After the break, we are going to let Michael talk about Game Maker from Yo-Yo Games. So that's a different game engine and the second one that we're going to be talking about in this course. And after that, then we're going to have Adam on. Actually, you'll see Adam before Module 5 Unity, but Adam's going to come on and talk about the third dimension offered to us by the Unity game engine. Very exciting stuff in the Unity world. I think there might be monsters involved. Yeah, I think there might be monsters or dino. I don't want to give too much away, but we'll just, Anyway, so that's Module 5 Unity, and then we're going to kind of wrap it up with some information about how do you make money on a game that you create? That's probably the important part in a lot of people's minds. So we're going to talk about monetization, and then we're also going to talk about how you submit your app to the store. When you've created it with an engine, it has to be packaged up and submitted to the Windows store so that the whole world can enjoy your game. So that's it. That's what we're going to be talking about today.
Okay. So with regard to setting expectations for you right now who are watching, our target audience is really the beginning game developers. So if you haven't made a game yet, this one's for you. you're probably somewhat technically inclined to have some development skills, and we have some suggested prerequisite links that you should definitely look at on the screen right now. If you have those links and you want to brush up on some skills, that would be excellent for you to check into. But that's kind of the setting. We're not expecting that you've done this before. In fact, we're hoping that you're going to start doing it, especially after today. Now, the MBA community is one you certainly want to join. Free online training for both developers such as ourselves and the IT world. You have over 1.2 million registered users already, and we would like you to see where you rank. You can earn 50 MBA points for this event if you go to the link on the screen, the aka.ms MBA-voucher, and that is case sensitive, by the way. And then enter the gaming code as you see it there, and that expires. So make sure and do that, and show what you got. Show your muscle. All right. Well, let's get right into this very first module with regard to content on planning your game. This should not be underestimated how important this step is. This step could really change the entire direction of where your game's going to go. So don't miss out on some of the tips here. This is pretty critical.
Michael, I actually heard that any project should be at least 80% planning and 20% execution. And I think as developers, we're tendent, unfortunately, to just dive right into the code. And because we've got a great idea, and that's awesome, but we dive right into the code, and I think we make too many course corrections, and we waste a lot of time, spin our wheels, when really we should sit back, do a better job at the planning process, and then when we execute, we can be super efficient. We won't have nearly as many bugs, nearly as many course corrections. We can just be on goal the whole time. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on planning.
Absolutely. And in fact, what I would even say to extend that is that if the excitement level to just code in general for any kind of project, imagine the excitement level that you'll have if you're going to start a game. So you'll even more so probably want to skip this step because it's so exciting to get involved right away. So definitely you want to plan it. So we're going to give you a tip right now on how you can do that, how you can start to plan your game. So first thing we're going to discuss is the analysis. What you should do, what you should study prior to even getting started with anything, and that is on the audience and the competition. Then we're going to look at platforms and architecture later. But right now, our focus is on analysis. And this is the way that we could start it off. Let's imagine this scenario, if you will. Someone wants to make a game. They want to make a word puzzle game. And that's all they have in their mind right now. I want to make a word puzzle game. Well, if they have that in their mind, but they don't do any further thinking on that, they might start the coding, but they might not have a very differentiated game. But let's consider now what you could say would be some thought processes that would guide you to wanting to do something very important, a very key thing that we're about to learn. So someone might say, I'm making a simple word puzzle game, so why would I need to analyze anything? It's too simple. What would it change? So keep that in mind. And the other person might say, well, why bother making a word puzzle game? I think there's hundreds or thousands of them out there anyway. But maybe there's a good reason for you to actually consider it. So what can you do to help you with your planning? Make a statement. What we mean by make a statement is not like a fashion statement, although maybe that's what your app's going to do or game. This is a best at statement. This is meaning you're thinking right up front, what is my game going to be best at? So let me give you an example with the word puzzle. The name of the game is Dr. Ow. By the way, that's word spelled backwards. Dr. Ow is a word scrambler game for Windows Phone and is best at engaging users to compete online with advanced puzzles. Now contrast that with how someone else could have their best at statement with a word puzzle game. Dr. Ow is a word scrambler game for all Microsoft devices and is best at helping children learn how to spell. So, do you think that word puzzle game would be different than the previous one? Absolutely. One's about hardcore online competition with word puzzles, and the other one's geared towards younger children to help them how to spell. You think that would guide also the way you would do your user experience? And a lot of other things? Absolutely. So I think that's key. You got to have the best stat statement.
Yep, agreed.
All right, so now that you have your best stat statement, the next question is going to be who is really going to be your audience? So I had there know your audience, but it's really target your audience. You are going to make an impact not just by knowing them, but as you're designing and develop, you're targeting that audience. So of course, you're going to do your user experience for young children very different than you would for an advanced crowd. You're going to do your marketing strategy different based on who your audience is going to be and even how you're going to monetize. You might think, for example, hey, if this is children that are going to primarily be doing this, I don't know if they're going to click the purchase. Maybe I might be able to do a strategic ad somewhere. And yet, if it's going to be the other route where it's hardcore gamers, maybe there would be some in-app purchases or things that you can do in there that would entice the older crowd that might have the ability to make those purchases. So your monetization strategy might even change just based on who that audience is going to be. So that's really important to understand. The other thing we're going to look at right now is the competition. Now, when we say the competition, we could say it's just easily about, just looking to see who else has word puzzle games out there. And that's part of it. But you want to put these dimensions into your analysis. You want to understand, how is it that other word puzzle games are priced? What makes them peculiar? And what that really means is what makes them different. And then finally, what platforms are they on? See, all of those are analysis of your competition. What would be the case if you found a really cool game on one platform and it wasn't on the Windows Store yet? Well, that's an opportunity statement for you. So be thinking about that as well. Now, while we're here on this topic, the 3 Ps of competition, the pricing, the peculiarity, and the platforms, you want to keep in mind that the main thing here, and this is also in line with your best stat statement, what makes you different? Because guess what? Word puzzle games right now are pretty popular. Imagine if one of the most popular ones out there right now decided not to get involved just because there were other ones already out there. So don't let other ones distract you, but be sure that you're different. What's your differentiator? And remember those 3 Ps, pricing, peculiarity, and platforms. Now, with platforms on the mind, I'd like to switch gears over and have Mr. Jeremy discuss with us, what do you mean by platforms, Mr. Jeremy?
All right. So I'm going to talk about platforms, and I'm going to do the next section on architecture as well. But I did want to just tack on to your idea of the audience and competition analysis and say that it might be possible that the only added thing that your app brings is a differentiated user experience, a usability. It might be that the app really does already exist in the market, but you've used it and it's not fun for the finger. I mean, it's not great for mobile experience. It's not extremely usable. And so you can make the same app, or virtually the same app. Of course, you want to make sure you're not stepping on copyrighted ideas or whatever. But,
absolutely.
But you can make essentially the same app with a better usability, and now that is part of your best stat statement. I'm going to be the best in my category at offering the same thing,
excellent,
but it's going to be something that people love.
Love it.
Yeah. Okay, let's look at platforms. You have looked at the field, you've looked at the people that are going to be using your game, you've downloaded a number of other versions of your game so that you can figure out what already exists on the market and so on. And now you need to figure out what platform landscape you're going to be choosing, because this is going to determine what your development team looks like, what your schedule looks like, all of that. It's going to be very important. And there are lots of considerations here. The questions that I have on the screen are really big questions, actually. Mm-hmm. The first of which is native or web. This is a classic question. Right now, right now our landscape is one that makes this question inherently difficult. Should I create a native application that in the language of the platform I'm writing on? So if I'm writing on Windows 8, writing it in C# or XAML or HTML and JavaScript. Or if I'm on the iOS platform on iPhone or iPad, then I'm going to be using Objective-C and their design language. These are the native apps, okay? Web apps, you create these on a server, and there are some really big advantages to using this architecture. If you can create your app entirely on the web, then we're going to see a slide later, your data, your logic, and your UI all exist in the cloud. You can update it anytime you want, and it's updated for everybody. and it's a common experience for everybody. And the advantage is actually more pronounced in games because games tend to create their own design language, and so you don't necessarily need the operating system's design language. You don't necessarily navigate lists and access menus the same way that you do in the operating system. You may very well just be using the game the way that it determines the design. So always ask the question, can I create this using the web stack and using a traditional web app delivery? But keep in mind that this web app is going to be running in the browser, and you're going to be constrained to the browser, and there's some serious limitations that you're going to have to face. One of them is you're not going to have access to the full device. There are some tricks, some ways of getting some geolocation and some of these device-specific features, but by and large, you're going to be missing out on a lot of native features when you choose the web. You also may very well be missing out on some performance. So try it on the web, try it in HTML and JavaScript, make a quick little prototype and see if it's going to work performance-wise for your app. You may be able to gather some experience so that you'll be able to determine just intuitively if it's going to work in the HTML and JavaScript through a browser. Now, we're talking today about using game engines to make Windows 8 apps, and you have to keep in mind that when you choose the web stack for making a Windows 8 app, you're not making that same decision. You're not making those same trade-offs because an HTML and JavaScript app run on Windows 8 is actually running natively. So you have full hardware acceleration. You're not going to run into the same performance issues. And you have full full access to that device. So you don't have those considerations to make. So that's a good story for developers right there. But that's just a classic question. You're going to have to make that decision right up front. Another question, is this going to be mobile? Is this a game that you're going to expect people to play on a large screen with a large processor with a machine that's plugged in, essentially? Or is this going to be a good game for playing on the bus? I know I have a lot of those games that I wouldn't play it on the bus. It just doesn't work on that small screen. And there are other games that work great on a small screen. In fact, it feels a little bit silly on a large screen. Right. So ask yourself, is this a mobile game? When you answer the question, yes, this is mobile, you are determining that there are going to be significant constraints to your project. You have to consider the battery, you have to consider the processor, you have to consider the form factor, you have to consider all of these things when you know that you're targeting mobile. Okay? And a number of these engines will target mobile for us right out of the box. I know that Construct 2 is the framework that I'm going to be talking about today. And with Construct 2, you can just export your project for Windows 8, for the tablet and the desktop, or you can export it for Windows Phone. So you usually make some design considerations there, but they make it pretty easy for you. And if you're going to that environment, then you need to make sure that you make those decisions. All right. You need to figure out if you want to be on all of the platforms, or would you rather just kind of target one platform and be differentiated on that platform. The Windows 8 and Windows Phone design style, the tiles, the simple graphics, is a very exciting, very unified, very elegant design language, and it's very popular. You can create a game that takes advantage of this design language and really thrills your audience just in that alone. Of course, the gameplay is still going to be very important, but when an audience member when a user has an app, a game that's running on Windows 8 or on Windows Phone 8, and it takes full advantage of all of the design style of those platforms, users really like that. So that you might want to target just one platform just because that's where you are. I know developers and I know entire dev shops that say, we don't really want to get into cross-platform, we just want to put our eggs in this basket and make apps for this platform. They can get excellent at making apps for that platform. They can make sure that they're making native apps. There's some serious advantages to that. Cool. What do you think about the differences between between web apps, native apps, mobile and non-mobile? Any considerations you want to bring up there?
So obviously it's going to be a matter of also, you worry about all the different devices and all that kind of stuff and the compatibility factor. With all that said, I personally feel that, of course, and we're going to be leaning towards this today, that putting the game in that absolutely perfect scenario where you're going to get the best experience with the proper device and the absolute I would say, I think, of course, I'm being biased, that the Windows 8 platform is going to provide a fantastic, or is providing a fantastic experience for those, especially with the touch-enabled devices. So, you know, I'm slanted to start to think that I like the web app stuff. In fact, of course, HTML5 is a passion of mine. But I just love the fact that I can also use those technologies, if I choose to do so, to create an app for Windows 8 as well.
Yeah, that's very cool. I was talking at a presentation recently, and I was looking for a good example of a cross-platform game on the Windows platform. And actually, there were a lot of them to choose from. And I was pretty surprised. I went and downloaded Skulls of the Shogun on Windows 8. And then I downloaded it on Windows Phone, and it was a really fun experience on both devices. I didn't expect it to be so fun on a small form factor on the phone, but it really was good gameplay. They did a great job with that. And I get to level 3 in the game, and it's kind of a story. It's unfolding. You know, you're in the afterlife, and you're a samurai with a gigantic mustache. And I think that it's safe for kids because there's no killing, because everybody in the game's already dead.
Oh, great.
You're in the afterlife. Anyway,
that's good.
So you play this on Windows 8 and it works great, and you play it on Windows Phone and it works great. So yeah, just a good cross-platform story. Another question that you need to ask yourself is, what do I have for developer bandwidth? Are you a one-man shop? Are you developing these apps on your own in your basement in the evening? You've got a day job. That's like a lot of us. That's me. And or do you have a buddy that you're doing this with? Is it 2 of you so you can work together on that? Or are you a pretty decent sized shop? You've got a separate test team, or a tester even. You've got a separate graphical designer. Those are some serious considerations as far as what your developer bandwidth is, how much you're going to be able to handle, and they're going to determine how much you can bite off. I know whenever I see a really well done game, something pulls at my heart, and I go, man, I would just wish I could take the time in the evenings and weekend and make something that's that good. I have to remind myself there's a good chance that was a whole team of people working on the graphics, and then working on the gameplay, and then doing all the testing. It's a big effort. Some of these games are a massive effort. I know I have a friend that works on some major video game titles for Xbox, and he tells me about it, and it's a huge effort. You know, they have massive teams, and they have all kinds of resources, and they bring in actors, and they have professional Foley artists, and just everything that you need, you know.
Yeah. So if you're the one-man shop, you got to do all the roles, where sometimes you have an entire team just for one focus.
Yeah, you got to wear all of those hats. Absolutely. Now, what this game development with small teams, just you or 2 or more people often bring up, is this scenario of distributed development, a distributed team. You're in one geography and you've got a teammate that's in another geography entirely, and you guys are going to need to be working together. And probably a lot of you as developers have at least some experience with source code and source code management, source code control systems. And if you don't, you really should get good at that. It's a fundamental skill for computer scientists in today's world. A lot of you are familiar with distributed source control systems like Git. Git is kind of the one that's coming out on top over Mercurial. That might be subjective. I'm not sure. I think it's fairly objective, fairly easy to say that one's kind of coming out on top. And things like GitHub are an excellent repository for some collaboration on the same project. I know that I work with some of my teammates on source control, and it allows us to really get a ton done at the same time, simultaneously. And I want to tell you that there's a lot of ALM offerings through Team Foundation Service. Team Foundation Service is Microsoft's Team Foundation server, except we're hosting it in the cloud, and you just go to tfs.visualstudio.com and you can sign up and get your own prefix. So for instance, I'm at codefoster.visualstudio.com. I go there. That is my own Team Foundation server in the cloud. And the cool thing about this is that I can still use Git as my source control, so I can drop down to the command line. I'm doing distributed. I can work really well on a plane. I can commit all my changes and collaborate with my fellow developers. But because I'm on Team Foundation Service, I get the full ALM on top of that. So I get work items, work item tracking, a burn down chart. I can really get good control over my team, what it is that we're working on, when it's due, and everything, because Team Foundation Service gives us so much resource.
That's very cool.
Yeah. So that's a lot to bite off. One more point on platforms and platform selection. and that is, well, we kind of talked about this already, but just the resources that you have. Do you have the graphic designer? Do you have the testers? Do you have the ability to throw a lot of man hours at this, or don't you? And then finally, the question is, if you're going to use a game engine, which one are you going to use? Now, today, in this course, we're going to be presenting 3 different game engines. There are more. There's lots of them.
There are.
But we're going to be talking about Skira Construct 2, Yo-Yo Game Maker, and Unity 3D. Those are the 3 frameworks, the 3 engines, rather, that we're going to be talking about today. And if you want to choose one of those, if those fit the game that you're doing, if they fit your platform selection, then go ahead and make that choice. Which platform would you choose? Which engine would you choose?
Well, I think what we're going to find out is with the two-dimensional games, it's going to be a knockout, duke 'em up on the Skira's Construct 2 and the Yo-Yo Games Game Maker. I'm going to have to look at your module first on Construct 2 before I have an opinion on that. I'm highly biased to Game Maker by Yo-Yo Games. But if I was going to go 3D, I'd probably be looking at what Mr. Tuliper, who's going to probably steal our thunder, is going to show us later with Unity.
So why don't you have a Game Maker shirt on?
I don't know.
I'll tell you why.
Because I didn't get one, that's why.
It's because the T-shirts are coming from Ireland and they didn't get here in time.
Aye.
So,
Okay.
not that a Windows Phone T-shirt is any less exciting, but
This is a good backup.
yeah, it's a good backup. Okay, so another point. I want to clear up some terms here. Okay, there's lots of terms that are going to be thrown at you. A lot of you might be new to the gaming world entirely, and there are lots of gaming terms. We won't have time to cover them all, but one that I think is really important to cover right now is this. There are libraries, frameworks, engines. You'll hear these terms sometimes used interchangeably. In fact, you heard me slip up and use framework when I meant engine today.
Right.
And so
do they
I
all
want to clear
mean?
this. Yeah, exactly.
Come on.
So I'm going to clear this up.
Good.
A library is just code that somebody else wrote, packaged up, and you're using it. Okay? It's good to use libraries because it means that you're not reinventing the wheel. Somebody already did this. You're using it in your game. Now, there are open source libraries that lots of people contribute to. You can look at the licenses for them, and there's a good chance that you'll be able to use that in your product. Okay? That's the world of open source right now. Very exciting. But these are libraries. Your game is going to take what we call a dependency on a library, but it's a relatively light dependency. If something went wrong and this library fell out of existence and you couldn't find the source code anywhere for some crazy reason, you would probably be able to swap out a different library, do some rewirings, and you'd be back up and running. Okay? That's a library. Code that somebody else wrote that you're using. Libraries usually have a good API, so you'll hear that term as well. API is just how you interact with it. You want to look for libraries that have an API that is easy for you to learn. Okay? A well-formed API. That excites real developers. If you don't get excited about a real API, ask yourself if you shouldn't be a banker.
Okay.
You might just make a great banker if APIs don't get you excited. Okay, frameworks. Now, a framework is like a library. It's code that you bring in. Somebody else wrote it. But we call it a framework because it's kind of like your skeleton. You're founding your game on it. You're doing your game in that framework. Okay? The Java virtual machine is essentially a framework. The .NET framework is essentially a framework. Okay? These are things that you're taking a dependency, but you're really invested in that dependency. And if it went away, you would have to completely rewrite your application, okay? Because you're taking a strong, hard, solid dependency on a framework, okay? Now, the 3 things that we're going to be talking about today are not really libraries or frameworks, because it's not like you're going to create a new project and then bring in the Game Maker library or Game Maker framework. No, you're going to open Game Maker and you're going to start your game in Game Maker. And we call it an engine because you're going to create your game in this engine, and then this engine is going to churn out the results. It's going to churn out the other projects.
Right.
Now, the huge advantage to an engine is that it can churn out the projects. You build it using the rules of the engine, and then it can churn out the projects in various platforms or various languages. Right. So you go ahead and make your game in Construct 2, and then you say, I'd like to create that as an HTML5 game. And now I'd like to create that as a Windows 8 game and now as an iPhone game. So you can do that. It's a big advantage. It's a good way of getting onto multiple platforms practically simultaneously. There's usually some tweaking that has to happen.
Sure. And I'd also like to comment on that too, that within those engines then, some of those other elements might exist. For example, one of the engines might in itself import an open source library, or they might have a support for a particular kind of framework. So the engine is kind of the tool that gets it all rolling, and then within that tool, we might be grafting in some of these other things that Jeremy's been talking about.
Yep. Very cool. Okay. Let's move on to the next section, which is, I'm going to talk about architecture. Okay, the architecture of your game. Now, architecture is not necessarily a consideration on a micro level when you're using an engine. It still is. It's good to know these architectural concepts, but you don't have to have a computer science degree in order to make a game using an engine. You don't have to have a lot of the theory, but if you do, it helps. But there still are architectural considerations even when you're using an engine to create your game. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those. But before I get into the architecture of the application, I want to talk about the architecture of your team. So I mentioned this a little bit, but when I was talking about distributed teams, but ask the question, is your development team, is that just you? Or do you have other people that you're working with? And you should ask yourself if it wouldn't be a good idea to either grow or shrink your team. If you could get your game that you're working on into a platform like Codeplex, which is an open source project hosting system online, you can use Git underneath it, and you can host your game on Codeplex, and then all of a sudden you can invite your neighbor or your friend from school or whoever, your colleague at work, in the evenings and weekends to come work on your game with you. You know, get them plugged into your source control system, and they can help you out. They can work on your game with you. So you might want to grow. You might really do yourself a favor by growing just a little bit. You might find somebody who has really good design skills because you don't. Or maybe you're the designer and you need to find somebody who has some skills in writing code because you don't. So you might think about growing your team. You also might want to think about shrinking your team. I can imagine there are some situations where you might want to shrink your team.
You have to explain.
You might have too many cooks in the kitchen. Have you run into that?
Maybe.
Yeah. Sometimes a project is hard to push forward if you've got, 4 people that are trying to, do what they want to do. And it might be better if for your game, if you just pared down and 1 or 2 of you worked on this one and you set a couple of other guys working on a different project entirely. So make those considerations. Architect your team for success. Make sure that they're going to be contributing and not taking away from the success of your game. It's important.
Sure.
And then do you have the tooling for working distributed? And I already talked to you about TFS. It's free for teams of up to 5. So you may as well go to tfs.visualstudio.com and get started with that tooling. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Let's talk for a second about the architecture of the application then.
Okay.
Another huge consideration, especially in today's world. Have you heard the term cloud lately?
Yes.
About 7 times a day?
Yes.
If not more. What is the cloud? Why are we talking so much about the cloud these days?
Well, because it is a central place where everyone can put their stuff.
But haven't we had that for years in the form of like online hosting companies and the internet?
Yeah, so why do we have this cloud?
So what's the modern affixation to cloud?
I don't know.
You're at a loss for words.
I'm at a loss.
Actually, I think that most of it is a fad, although there's a lot of new stuff, new and exciting stuff that does differentiate cloud computing from other servers on the internet that we've been using for years, such as the ability to scale, the ability to scale up and scale down, and the ability to not just have infrastructure as a service where we basically have servers that we host in the cloud, and then we can go install whatever software on them we want. But we now have a lot of platform as a service offerings where it makes it super duper easy. You don't have to get into your server management. You basically just go, you want data, and you just go to your service and you create data. You use something like CouchDB or Azure Mobile Services, or if you want to put an API in the cloud, you can use something like Buddy or Parse or, again, Azure Mobile Services. There are lots of services that are in the cloud. You don't have to worry about the scale. You don't have to worry about the architecture. You just get to take advantage of those and use those for your app. So there are definitely some extremely strong advantages to the modern cloud. Now, if you were to write an application for, let's say, a phone, and you wrote the whole application on the phone, we would call that a client app. Okay? It's running on the client, entirely on the client.
Okay.
And we could split the application out into 3 sections: the data, the logic, and the UI. And that's what I'm showing on this slide here: the data, the logic, and the UI. Okay?
And so you're saying that's all on that phone right now?
This is all on the phone. Notice there's nothing in the cloud on the top. There's only 3, all 3 sections, all 3 segments of my app are on the client.
And your top section is billowy.
It is. It's billowy. Did you notice that looks like a cloud?
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you for noticing that. Now, at some point you realize this is not ideal. What is not ideal? Let's look at data first. What's not ideal about having all of the data for my application on the client?
Well, you couldn't share anything, I suppose.
Yeah. If I made a new high score and I wrote it into my data store, what happens to the other users that use the app? They don't get to see my high score, right?
True.
Because that data only exists on my phone. Not a good way to do it. And not in today's world.
I agree.
Not on devices that are assumed to be always connected, or even usually connected, or occasionally connected. Even if it's an occasionally connected device, we should still be sharing some data with the other people that are using the app. It's a given. So let's move that data component up into the cloud.
Ooh, what?
Now, how do we do that?
Yeah.
And there's lots of ways to do that, okay? Lots of ways to move your data up into the cloud. I mentioned a couple of them. Azure Mobile Services is a really cool offering. I love Azure Mobile Services, and I'm using it in a number of the apps that I work on. The thing I like about Azure Mobile Services is it feels like a NoSQL solution. I basically just create my JavaScript objects and drop them into a table. But behind the scenes, it's actually storing that data in an Azure SQL database. And so I have the full advantage of sitting on top of SQL Server, and so I could connect to it with a connection string, and I could access that data in a very low-level, powerful way. But for me as a developer, in 90% of my use cases, I just want to make my objects, drop them into my database, and then go pull them out in a very modern, easy, NoSQL fashion.
So with your analogy that you've been using, you're saying that maybe now that high score could be something that could be stored out there and in the cloud.
Completely.
Instead of putting it on the local device, it would actually go in the cloud somewhere.
Absolutely.
Cool.
So now I might have what kind of a table might I have to store that high score? I might actually just have a table called scores, and in order to build on the client side, in order to build a list of all of the high scores, all I have to do is ask that table, could you please give me the highest 10 scores, and then that database would give me the highest 10 scores, and that's what I show in my game. So now I have a solution for my data to put it in the cloud so that I can share it on my multiple devices. So all the users that are playing my game are able to see the same data. Okay?
Okay.
Now, the little flow chart there represents the logic in your application. Okay? This is some people call this business logic, which doesn't necessarily apply in games. Game logic. This is
logic, game rules.
This is the rules. This is the decisions that need to be made in the game.
Okay.
Now, if you have that logic on the device, you're repeating it on every device, which is from a resource standpoint, probably not too much of a consideration. It's probably okay. One of the problems is if you have sensitive IP, if you have IP, intellectual property tied up into the logic of your game, like you have stuff that you have paid your developers big money to work on for years, you have to be really careful, because when you put logic on the device, you have to assume that it can be compromised.
I see.
Even with today's best ways of obfuscating and encrypting your source code on the devices, you have to assume if it's on the client. Here's what we say: never trust the client. Anything that's on the client could be compromised. Never trust the client. Okay. So one huge advantage to putting the logic into the cloud is that you're in control of the cloud. People don't have access to that. It's up there behind your authentication system, and it's for the most part safe.
Right.
Unless your cloud gets hacked, but this is dramatically lower chances of that than the client being hacked. Okay.
Sure.
So that's one of the big advantages to moving your logic into the cloud. What does this actually look like? This looks like a really good API. Now, I feel like this, the way that you see this slide right now, my data and my logic are both up in the cloud. I feel like this is nirvana.
Oh.
This is a good place to be, because this means that when you're ready to create a new app on a new machine, you don't have to recreate that logic in a new language. You already wrote it in your language of choice in the cloud. You've created a nice API coming out of that, not just for accessing your data, but for actual usage of the app, for your actual game rules, for your actual logic. Okay, so it's nirvana, but it's also idyllic in some ways. You'll end up compromising and putting quite a bit of logic in the app on the client, most likely. Okay. Now you could also put your UI in the cloud, and what would that look like?
It starts to think kind of like a website.
It looks like a website, basically, right? Because a website is saying all of the data, the logic in the form of JavaScript, and then even the UI in the form of your HTML files and the CSS styling and layout. All of that exists on the cloud. And there's some big advantages. If you want to change anything about the UI of your application, you change it in one place, and it's good for all developers, right?
Yeah.
So this is a good place to be for some applications, for some systems. This is a really good place to be. But I still feel like this is nirvana, because what this offers you is, especially for business applications, for applications that have some content and some interaction beyond just game interaction and game content. This allows me to create a native UI. So when I'm on my Android device, I feel like I'm on an Android device.
Right.
And when I'm on a Windows phone, I feel like I'm on a Windows phone.
Right.
I create my UI, and it takes some work to create an application on each native device.
Right.
But it doesn't take as much work as reproducing all of that logic.
Right.
Okay.
So that seems to be the key win when we're planning this. And of course, we're not talking about how to do all this right now. We're in the planning phases, but we're saying at the big level, if you're going to have your logic and your data up there in the cloud, then boy, that gives you a lot of scalability with regard to management and scale. And yet if you put the client, if you actually take the time to create the client, the game targeting that device or that platform, well, then you do kind of get the best of all worlds. That's really cool.
Yeah. So these are just some considerations that you're going to have to make when you're deciding that you're going to take on the fun and exciting venture of building a game. So think through all of those. And what we're going to do is we're going to move into our next module after a brief break for all of our live listeners. And our next module is going to be about the assets that make up your game.
Yeah, and in fact, before we go there, some of the questions have been regarding, well, what if I don't have some of these engines installed? Can I do this today? And the answer is absolutely you can watch. Absolutely, you should be engaged today, even if you don't. We might even be going into how you could acquire or get a hold of some of these gaming engines. So, take advantage of this opportunity to see it in action. If you do have it installed, that's great. You just don't have to have it installed.
Yeah, and actually that's a good point. At the beginning of each of our modules, we'll spend a couple minutes telling you how you can go to the websites, download most of these have a free or trial version,
right.
and a lot of them are very generous. So you can download these engines and install them and get it going right away. As a matter of fact, even if you're making a Windows 8 game, you can install these frameworks on on Windows 7 and get going right away, even if you haven't upgraded to Windows 8 yet.
Absolutely.
But I think you should upgrade to Windows 8.
Of course.
Yeah.
Very good. So that is all we have for now, and we do look forward to that next section on assets. It's going to be good.
We'll see you really soon.